90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today our topic is investigations after an accident and why they are so important and what they should include. And our special guest is Mark Wilhelmson, and he is a retired investigator who used to investigate, and still does, claims and injuries and facts concerning an accident, after the accident up till trial preparation. And he's going to share his knowledge with us for benefit of attorneys and litigants on both sides, both plaintiff and defendants, but especially defendants. Mark, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
And why are investigations so important? You know, getting all that information up front and before trial.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think the purpose of the background investigation is really simply to say, what does the plaintiff say happened? What are the injuries? And then it's our job to basically verify that that's in fact the case. And of course, we want to go back into the history and just make sure there isn't anything back there that would, such as a prior, accident or anything else that could possibly impact a future settlement.
And I just want to reemphasize what you said. You want to verify what the story that the plaintiff or even witnesses are saying about what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and prevent surprise at trial about claimed injuries or consequences or under injuries or cost of damages, etc. So you just want to help the defendants, the counsel, understand the facts and the consequences and what's really there.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times with what I found over the years, and I did this for 26 years, and I still do a fair amount of consulting after sort of a semi-retirement a couple of years ago. But, I think that the key part for them is the attorneys will usually handle, 40, 50 cases at one time. Their ability to really go in depth on someone's background and do their own sort of mini investigation or have their paralegal do a mini investigation. I've witnessed how badly those can go. And so what we actually would do back then that would be our job, is to really fill those gaps and start uncovering things that they simply, most of the time, don't have the time or even the training for.
And you know where to look, and you know how to look at the information you've collected to dig further and dig deeper and get collateral information as well, because one clue may lead to others.
Right. And I think, the thing that we did differently, and again, I met so many other investigation companies and investigators for other companies, was we would require that we would have access to the entire files. So we would actually travel to the attorney's offices, go through the entire files, and then really create a profile on the plaintiff. And so we actually, knew what we were working with, as opposed to just relying on, a report, the latest report from the attorney to the carrier, which usually had a lot of information that would be beneficial for us in an investigation that would be missing. So we really took in a very early stage approach too. So one of the things that we would tell the insurance carriers, of course, the adjusters and house counsel, and basically all of our clients, was the biggest benefit we can have to you is to start as early as possible. And so that was a big part of our business.
And it's important that plaintiff and plaintiff attorneys listen to this as well, because they're going to do better by being honest, and they can make sure the information is out there up front and get whatever information may help their position on liability and their claims for damages.
Sure. I think just knowing that there are some investigators out there doing the background research that we are, I think that should be interesting to them, to let them know that, hey, some of the things that your client might be saying, if it's true, that's fantastic. But if it's not, there's somebody out there trying to find that out if they're doing it properly.
What kind of background investigations would you try to cover as part of that process? initially and perhaps deeper as the cases develop during discovery and up till trial?
Sure. Well, we would want to, how the investigation sort of changed over time. Now, I started back in 1995. So this was when, the internet was just sort of literally coming online. So it was so primitive back then. But the biggest change, of course, I think everybody would agree over time, has been social media. And so the social media impacts, obviously surveillance and the background research. So making sure that you really start, like I said, from the earliest stage possible, and start looking into that background immediately. Because I think what'll happen a lot of times is once sometimes in some cases that we found that the plaintiff's attorney gets wind that we're getting closer to settlement or closer to the end of trial. Some things would be mysteriously missing from the plaintiff's profiles on Facebook. They'd start really taking a look and making sure there's nothing that has been said historically that could impact the settlement, such as a prior accident or prior neck pain, back pain, that type of thing. And so, because that's what we would do, is we would find those things. And so I think, like I said, is making sure that from a defense perspective, getting on the social media profiles of the plaintiff and really going back as far as you possibly can to see if there are any indications of anything prior, some prior injuries that might be helpful. And I think, as far as social media is concerned too, I'll just say, from a surveillance perspective is what was a big help, because I started out doing surveillance. And over time, once we had social media available to us, it's not just about doing social media searches on the plaintiff themselves. It's also about doing it on the family members and really trying to really build a profile and say, where will this person potentially go if we're following them? We had a case I'll just briefly tell. It was very serious injuries to this person. He had a set of IMEs over, I think it was 3 or 4 days. Just one IME after the other. And we were doing surveillance every single day in New York City. And boy, he played the part really, really well. Going up and down the subway, we had him with his cane and all that kind of stuff. But when I was doing the background search on him, I said, listen, just be aware that he has a girlfriend in New Jersey. So if just in case, just be ready to go, to have somebody on foot, but also somebody in a car ready to go and follow them over to Jersey, possibly. Well, what do you know? On the last day, after the last IME, he gets on a bus, goes over the bridge, and we're following him. And what ends up happening is he gets off the bus, and there's a 7-Eleven right there. He walks off the bus, takes that cane, and it was a collapsible cane. So he takes it, collapses it, throws it in his backpack, walks into the 7-Eleven, and then we knew where he was going because we had the address for his girlfriend. And then we got him on tape just walking completely normally, all the way down from the bus to where he got off on the bus stop back to his girlfriend. And that was... He lost a lot of money based on that. And we would not have really known that unless we really did that research in social media to find out where he might go and be ready for that.
And surveillance, and it's no secret to plaintiffs and attorneys and their clients should be aware of it, that, people want to know about your honest injuries and what you cannot and what you can do and what you're doing a little more slowly or irregularly. So it's not good to lie about it. There could be someone watching you or looking at the internet to see what you're able to do and what you don't do.
Sure. Absolutely.
And people also may put on the vacation pictures or activities at work or other photos. People just like to post things these days, especially with the internet, and show they're having a good time or doing other things.
Yes, we had an interesting case talk about something that's in the news a lot lately is AI, and so there are increasing a number of search companies that have an AI service where they will basically scrape the profiles, social media profiles of individuals, and to really try to uncover if there's anything there that could be helpful to the case. And so just before I left, we had a case where the AI, when it scraped the profiles, didn't catch something. And I get sort of like an intuition about people sometimes after all those years. And so what I did is I actually went back on the Facebook profile all the way back to, I think it was 8 years, because you can go way back on the social media profiles. They had it for a very, very long time, and ended up finding, posts about I don't know whether I should take a shot of vodka or a Vicodin for my neck pain, that they put years and years ago that the AI actually didn't catch. It's like, so I think the key there is like never really relying on one particular search result and saying, okay, well, now I know everything about somebody. It's really making sure that you have some eyeballs on it too, that you actually don't just rely on technology all the time. And that goes for searches, just general searches, such as, the LexisNexis type searches, criminal record searches. If you're getting a report back from your investigator that says, for instance, like litigation search negative, okay, well, what specifically do you mean? Did you do an archive lawsuit search? Did you do a civil, supreme, and federal search? How far back did you go? Did they live out of state? Did you do searches in that state? So, there's so many different angles that when we looked at how is a proper background search performed, it's really doing a number of different searches based on very strict criteria. So I can go into that if you'd like. But I think that the key is really there's so many nuances to it.
And even just searching on Google too.
Yeah, sure. There's Google and all sorts of different. In addition to social media, of course, there's Google but you'd have like a LexisNexis type search, which they'd be valuable, but at the same time, you have other searches that are very similar to that. These data mining companies that would have different results come back for the same person. So it's really about what really kind of cross-referencing everything. And I think, when we talked about early stage investigations too, is I think the defense attorney specifically, when they're doing the deposition of the plaintiff, is to go as deep as you possibly can. The amount of cases I had where I would be reviewing the plaintiff's deposition, and then I would look at one of these data mining companies and start saying, okay, where has this person been historically from? Having that deposition done properly was so important, as far as family members, address history, where they've lived, all of that information, should really be, you should dive in as deeply as you can, because it's really, really valuable if you actually know what to do with that information, which is something that we kind of specialized in.
I just want to remind our listeners again that we're talking with Mark Wilhelmson about investigations after an accident. You're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nass Community College in Garden City, Long Island, New York. And Mark, you've been telling us about why investigations are so important. It's important for the attorneys you work with to ask questions at depositions, detailed questions, background questions. This is the one chance to question the plaintiff or others under oath, and their questioning will confirm or perhaps provide other information to the information that you've dug up on them. And it's important that, plaintiff attorneys prepare their clients to answer truthfully and to deal with these issues, and certainly not to lie about them, because that's only going to create problems down the road. Mark, other things that, that attorneys following your ideas have asked or been able to dig up at depositions that enabled you to conduct deeper searches?
Sure. I touched on it a little bit earlier, and sometimes it's the most basic. We had a case where when we talk about LexisNexis, those types of searches and the deposition transcript, is we had a case, and a lot of people try to cover up their history this way and are successful at it. So you really have to have an eye for it. But we had a case where the plaintiff's deposition, he was asked, where have you lived historically? And so at the time, if I recall correctly, it was a number of years ago, but it was 4 different states. If I recall correctly, it was New York, New Jersey, and he said Florida. And what was interesting so I'm taking these notes, and he also had a name, and I'll just use not his actual name, but let's just say it's Tom Green. And so what was interesting is when I started looking at the data mining company search results, he left out the state of North Carolina. And you might say, okay, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, it was about 8 years. So I immediately go off, and say, okay, how can you leave out an 8-year state that you've been in 8 years? Unless it's a typo, right? That's possible. But the second thing that I also saw was that he would actually use the name Green, but I saw it in a couple of places with an E on the end. So that was interesting to me. because, historically in my background investigations, people will, change their names slightly because when you do a criminal record search properly, it's name and date of birth specific. A single letter, a single number that's off, it's going to come back negative. So what I did was I contacted the trial attorney. I said, listen, I'm just kind of getting some intuition here that we have some issues here. I want to run a criminal search in the state of North Carolina. And I want to run it under two different names. He says, sure, go ahead, because we've had a number of successful trials in the past. And so we got authorization for that. Well, it turned out that the guy, his real name was Green with an E on the end. And he was in prison for molesting his own daughter for that period of time in the state of North Carolina. So he had come up to New York, dropped the E off the end of his name, worked on construction sites. Whoever did background searches on this guy, would have run, let's just say his name is Tom Green, will run Tom Green without an E on the end, would have come up negative, despite having a proper date of birth. But so it's like those types of things are so important. These little data points that you have to make sure you tie these things in together, and just simply getting a full address history from the guy, and then having him say what his actual, what he's testifying to under oath, that his name is Tom Green, and asking you, have you ever changed your name? And all these little questions that a defense attorney can ask can really, lay the groundwork for us down the line to do a proper background investigation.
And sometimes people don't actually change their names, but they may use a middle name or a different spelling or something along those lines. So you want to get all these possible names that they've used that could also lead to medical records or other claims, or as you said, jail time, anything that might, lead to a thorough investigation.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I wanted to just add that was something that we did that was always different was ISO claim search casualty system. That was a search that we would use, that we would basically do on every single case we had. And a lot of times the carriers would perform, well, by the way, obviously that's going to uncover claims from a claim history on the claimant, going back to, in some cases, the 90s. I think it's over 90% of insurance carriers report those claims. So that it's an extremely valuable database to have access to. And when you're a defense attorney, you can subpoena those records, whether it's pre-note of issue or note of issue. And then, of course, the carriers can run them directly, but the adjusters don't run them properly. So the way to run them properly is to do the DMV searches ahead of time, do the LexisNexis type data mining research, find out all their addresses, all their aliases, all their possible dates of birth, social security number, all of these different data points, put that into a subpoena, and then have ISO run the search properly. Because the adjuster doesn't have time for this. I mean, if an attorney's handling 40 cases, they're handling double or triple that, right? So to actually put all these prior addresses in there, all of this information would take the adjuster a long time. But if you subpoena it, you're getting that information from the actual, from ISO directly. And that has just been just a game changer. That one search, that one subpoenaed record we do on every single case was just a gold mine.
And in a moment, I just want to ask you about, as it gets closer to trial or in terms of trial prep, whatever other suggestions you would make to defense counsel and alert plaintiff attorneys they should be ready for. My guest is Mark Wilhelmson, and he's a accident investigator. He's worked for different insurance companies, as you've heard, and we're talking about investigations after an accident and how important it is to people on both sides to get the information out there so the injuries can be honestly and objectively assessed in preparing the case for trial and then valuing the case for settlement. So, and you're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nest Community College in Garden City, New York. If you missed any portion of this program or you want to tell someone else about it, the podcast of this and many other shows from Law You Should Know are on the web at nccradio.org. So, Mark, as we get closer to trial, what are some important things that defense counsel should do with your help to prepare that case for trial?
Don't wait. I mean, if you have a case, especially in New York, you'll have multiple trial dates before you actually go to trial. And what the biggest mistake that we saw attorneys make that were our clients is they would give us the case to prepare for trial, a week or two before trial. And so here I am. I started accessing our databases. I started doing the research, and I can't possibly get an archive lawsuit out of King's Supreme Court or King's Civil Court, in a week. Some of these things take months, let alone subpoena those records, right? So for us, it's always, again, start that process as soon as possible. And if you take something as simple as a DMV search, you'll have information on the DMV, such as like prior accidents that will go back for 3 years. So if you wait till, the day or close to the trial, you just wiped out all of these years that you could have been tracking this person's history. And so I think it's really giving the investigator enough time to not only uncover things, but also get something admissible for you that you can actually use. And of course, when it comes down to trial, one of the things that we did as a firm was, we would be the ones who would be contacting all the experts, all the witnesses, make sure everybody is aware of the trial, every single trial date, because there would be multiple over sometimes a year or two, making sure that everybody was always up to date on what's going on, and never letting them just kind of go in the wind, So really accounting for giving that case to an investigator who hopefully knows what they're doing, and giving to them as early as possible. That's going to give you the best outcome in the end. And I guess just it's a nuance that we would cover as well. But make sure those experts, if they're a doctor, they're an IME doctor, whoever the expert is, make sure you know how they want to be paid. I can't tell you how many times where we would have an IME doctor who, wants to be prepaid, their check's not ready, and they're like, I'm not going anywhere.
And you also got to make sure they're available, because that trial judge may have a certain time that's ready for them, and if that doctor isn't available, it can have tremendous consequences if the court's not flexible. I also wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the records actually subpoenaed to the courthouse, whether it's state or federal. You or the counsel want to go there and look at those records, because they could be different. There may be some other records. They may lead to other information, and you want to go physically look at those records, or there may be missing information. Whatever it is, you want to look at those records. Fantastic
point. I mean, I can't stress that enough. I'm so glad you said that. You have, if you do not have your investigator or the attorney themselves, which they usually don't have the time, just because a record is showing in e-law, that it's in court, doesn't mean it's actually complete, doesn't mean it's certified. And so, no, you absolutely have to have eyes on the actual record in court to make sure it's complete. That's a fantastic point. And so that, again, that's one of those things that we would do. We would regularly make sure that the records are in court. And just because your investigator says they subpoenaed the records means nothing. They actually have to be there. So you serve 20 subpoenas. And that's another point that you just made earlier is just about the importance of giving the investigator that time, because a lot of these places, it could take a month or two, even though the returnable date on the subpoena is next week. They don't care. A hospital doesn't have time to get it there next week, right? So you have to make sure you give everybody enough time to do it, get everything in court properly.
And again, there could be additional information for whatever reason that's in those records that's not in the advanced copy you have, and you want time to go through and investigate that further. Mark, I know you were involved with some other activities and passions, so just take a moment to tell us about those.
Well, what happened with my career is I nearly lost my son, Marcus, just after he turned 2 years old when he choked. And so that was a really close call. And what I ended up finding out was that nearly 1 million children worldwide will, not make it to the age of 5. And it's due to these unintentional injuries, choking, sudden infant death syndrome, drowning, these types of issues. And so when this happened to my son, it scared the living daylights out of me because I have 4 kids. And so what I ended up doing is using my skill set as an investigator to really look at this problem. And we lose about 8,000 children here in the U.S. a year. These are accidents that could be prevented. And so what I'm doing now is I have a healthcare tech startup, and we're really trying to dive in and find out how can we solve this problem and radically reduce those deaths and injuries. So the skill set as an investigator has really come in handy.
And very briefly, what are some of those ways that those accidents can be prevented?
The number one thing is for a parent to be aware and skilled. So something like choking, CPR, how to prevent drownings, especially how to create a safe sleep environment when you have a baby. It's really the parent. It's on us to know these things. And so I actually wrote a book called Emergency. This book will save your baby's life. Right. I did that investigation and I put it into a book for expecting parents, and also caregivers, such as grandparents who usually take care of the kids these days because the dual income household.
And it's also good to let companies know if there's a problem with the products, and vigilance is very important. Can you give us your website for more information about your findings and research?
Sure. It's ourchildskeeper.com. So it's OurChildskeeper.com. And the book can be found at emergencythebook.com. And my email address is Mark with a K at ourchildskeeper.com. And so if you have any, I'd be happy to help anybody out if they have any questions from the investigation standpoint.
And just going back to the investigations after an accident, the bottom line is for both attorneys on both sides to investigate diligently so the truth comes out and everyone's on a level playing field.
100%.
I would like to remind our listeners that we've been talking about Mark Wilhelmson, and he also has the organization ourchildskeeper.com, dealing with child safety issues. And if you want to listen to the program about investigations after an accident or tell someone else about it, just go to the website for Law You Should Know at WHPC at nccradio.org, where a podcast of this and many other shows about law you should know is available. And I'd like to thank again Mark Wilhelmson for being our guest and sharing us with his knowledge about investigations after an accident. Please join us next week at this same time on 90.3 WHPC for another program on Law You Should Know.